I have no idea what it was, but as soon as I picked this game up, for some reason, I wanted to play it. The hell out of it, man. I had no idea what this game was. I'd never seen it before, but as soon as I picked it up, I wanted to play it.
Chrono Cross has always lived in the shadow of its predecessor, Chrono Trigger. It's not hard to see why. Chrono Trigger is considered to be one of the best RPGs ever made, but not only that, it's considered to be one of the best video games ever made. It was developed by a Japanese dream team, members coming from the Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest series, from Square and Enix. And at the time, this was not when they were the same company. So this is akin to the planets lining up of the best talent that you could get to make an RPG. And of course, they produced one of the best games ever made. So when the sequel came around, Chrono Cross, of course, those planets weren't going to align again. Of course, there were some members from the Chrono Trigger team that worked on Cross. But regardless, when the game came out in 1999 in Japan and in 2000 in North America, it had an enormous legacy to live up to. One of the biggest, I think, in video games. And undoubtedly, people said Chrono Cross was a great game in its own right. However, some people criticized the game from diverging too much away from Trigger, not living up to the legacy of Trigger, and of course having its own genuine flaws. Were all these justified? Well, we're about to find out. Right off the bat, we're greeted by the intro sequence. And I have to say that Chrono Cross executes to a T what I think, especially of RPG opening sequence, should do. And I think the number one goal for an RPG opening sequence is to get the player in the right mindset to play the game. Why do I say this? Well, for especially an RPG, in a lot of these games, you play them for an extended period of time. It takes you a while to finish these games, probably a couple dozen hours. So it's imperative that you hook that player in. And one of the greatest tools, I think, is the opening sequence, and definitely putting the player in the right mindset to receive the game properly. You're introducing them to this new world, these new characters, and you want the player to be receptive to them if you want your player to follow through in the game. This is exactly what I think Chrono Cross achieves. To put it simply, it's one of the best intros I've ever seen in a video game, period. And I've seen a bunch, even for games I haven't even played yet. And to put it short, if I was impressed by the cover of Chrono Cross when I first saw it, I was fully engaged and ready to play the game when I saw that intro. And like its predecessor before it, and many other RPGs and action-adventure games for that matter, you start off as a protagonist in his room being woken up by his mother. Truly a great sign of an epic adventure ahead. Chrono Cross's protagonist is a 17-year-old blue-haired boy named Serge. He pretty much was living a pretty peaceful, tranquil life on the islands of El Nino until one day he gets warped to another dimension or another world, it seems. In this world, he learns that he died 10 years ago. He does not exist at the current time. This has ramifications that go far beyond just his own death and critical to the plot and world of Chrono Cross. Stumbling upon this other world, he meets a girl named Kit who mysteriously is intrigued by him. They eventually team up, and their adventures will lead from them taking down local tyrants all the way to learning the fate and truth behind Serge's universe. The fact that Chrono Cross establishes its world so well is definitely a hook, I think, because you're very eager to learn more about it, and the plot definitely satisfies that want. But of course, as the plot moves along, it goes more from just learning about the intricacies of the worlds and the maybe slight differences between both of them, to learning more about the characters, more notably characters that are more central to the plot. It goes to more developing their characters and backstories, and as the plot moves along, more and more things keep getting added in, so things definitely take an acceleration, I think, of things coming at you, making things a lot more interesting as more information is being put towards you at a faster pace. There's not a lot of things that I can say Chrono Cross did wrong with its plot. Many of the things Chrono Cross did with its plot is either very good or excellent. However, if there is one thing that the plot has down going for it, not only just the plot, but the entire game, and in fact, hearing some of the criticism that Chrono Cross has got, it's down to this one flaw that has really polarized people on this game. And it's the very end of the game, where I think pacing is absolutely horrendous. So many new ideas, so many concepts, so many plot points are thrown in the last hour of the game, and it's not presented in a pretty way. It's pretty hard for the average person, including myself, to compute all of this information that is being thrown at you. This is really where people get lost, and this is where people say Chrono Cross has a bad plot, has bad story. I don't think so. I just think the way it was presented could have possibly have been the most horrible way that you could have possibly presented that. This is where pacing should have been brought in, where if you would have just given the player time to breathe after you feed the player this information, not just throw it in all at once. The way it is in the game, it feels like the developers were running out of time, running out of money, and they just had to throw it all in at the end without regard to how the player is going to experience this. This is really the biggest downfall that Chrono Cross has going for it. Despite the horrible pacing at the end, there is one very good thing contrasting it, which is the final boss battle, which I have to say, guys, one of the most interesting boss battles I've ever played in a video game, not just in an RPG. Chrono Cross's battle system kind of differs a little bit from other console-style RPGs. Mainly, it's also in its physical attacks. It comes in 3 different varieties: light, medium, and heavy. Kind of like in a fighting game, in which light attacks do less damage but have more chances of hitting, and higher attacks have more damage but less chances of hitting. You can also use combos in physical attacks. Its magical system, I think, is kind of where it also is very much different. Instead of having MP points that you spend to do magical spells, and characters having set amount of magical spells, it replaces everything with something called elements, in which every character has an element grid in which you can equip pretty much every spell in the game to any character. You would equip these spells to this grid, and you can use one spell per battle. Now, some people might find that system a little bit confusing, and I did at first, but it's not that hard to learn. But I really feel that the system does a great job later in the game because it's extremely deep, as you can customize your characters to certain specific parts of the world that you're in, or certain types of battles that you're about to go in, like in a boss. So I found the system very deep, especially once you get into the game a little bit deeper. And of course, it's the elephant in the room. The one thing that every single Chrono Cross video and review has to mention: the music. Whether people liked or hated this game, they always seem to agree that the music was some of the best music in pretty much all of video games. And I would have to agree. Going from the sentimental, heart-wrenching tracks like the theme to Another World, which is my favorite track, to the more heart-pounding, bombastic tracks like the themes to the bosses. It really does have its fair share of good tracks. I think Chrono Cross is a fantastic game. And unfortunately, in its own time, it was definitely overshadowed by Trigger and therefore overlooked and passed up by a lot of people. But I do think it's very nice to see that people over the years have rediscovered some of these overlooked gems and really admired at what we kind of missed back in the day. All in all, as a guy who's been playing video games for 15 years, I have to say that Chrono Cross is definitely one of the best games I've ever played. That was some of the best music I've ever played. It's definitely one of those games that kind of makes you think a lot, especially after you're done with it, and really reflect on what the hell you just experienced. Anyway, guys, as I said before, I had not played Trigger, but definitely after finishing Cross, there's really no question that I'm gonna have to play Trigger. Just no question about it at this point. But anyway, guys, I don't usually do reviews, but I just had to make a video about Cross, so I hope you enjoyed the review, guys. And as always, guys, I am Blackenfist, and I am out.